The subway car lurched forward with a familiar jolt, metal screeching against metal as commuters were pressed together like sardines in a can. Marcus Cole stood near the center, one hand gripping the overhead rail, the other holding his daughter's small fingers. Lily, 7 years old, pressed close against his leg, her backpack straps digging lightly into her shoulders as the train pitched and swayed. Around them, the crowd moved in waves, a collective rhythm of early morning exhaustion, coffee-scented coats, and half-awake murmurs. Marcus's eyes flicked over the faces, scanning the sea of strangers, and he felt the familiar surge of fatigue and responsibility. Every day this was the same, the struggle to keep Lily steady, safe, and occupied in a world that demanded they be invisible. The doors opened, letting in a gust of chilly air, and she stepped aboard. Victoria Ashford. Not the name anyone on the train would recognize, though Marcus would have no way of knowing it anyway. She wore a simple gray coat, tailored enough to hint at taste without ostentation, and carried herself with a quiet precision that somehow separated her from the press of bodies around her. Sharp eyes scanned the car, not with judgment, but with calculation, tired yet alert. She hesitated near the center, scanning for any space, any relief from standing, but the crowd paid her no mind. The anonymity of the subway was something she had forgotten she craved. For years, entrances had been doors that cleared themselves, greetings that anticipated needs, attention she hadn't asked for. Here, she was just another face among strangers. Marcus noticed her before she noticed him. Something in the way she held herself, a subtle tension, a slight recoil from the bumping bodies, triggered a reflex he had honed over years. Without a word, he lifted Lily onto his knee, then stepped aside, gesturing silently toward the empty seat. The little girl wriggled to make room, and he caught her gaze with a brief, reassuring smile. The woman hesitated, eyes briefly locking with Marcus's. In that moment, Victoria studied him, noting the roughness of his hands, the unpolished but clean look of his clothes, the calm patience that radiated from him as he adjusted his daughter's jacket collar. There was no hurry, no expectation, only steady, quiet attention, the kind of attention that spoke of endurance, not performance. Victoria sank into the seat, still observing. She had not taken the subway in 15 years, the last time, she had been in her 20s, walking briskly, a backpack stuffed with ambition and the raw energy of someone determined to make the world notice her. Now, she noticed the world, but it had stopped noticing her. The realization struck sharply, the woman who could influence global markets, who held signatures capable of shaping the lives of thousands, was just another tired commuter. And yet, in the span of 3 steps and a simple, unspoken gesture, Marcus had reminded her that recognition wasn't always about power. As the train rolled on, Marcus bent slightly to speak to Lily, his words lost in the rumble of wheels and chatter. The girl nodded, her trust complete, her attention absolute, as he adjusted a loose strap on her backpack. Victoria's eyes lingered on the scene, tracing the lines of his face, the way he positioned himself between his child and the press of bodies, the quiet heroism of ordinary life. In the cramped, humming car, amid the odor of wet coats and the scrape of sneakers, she felt the weight of her world press against the inside of her skull, the empire, the boardrooms, the endless strategy, and realized how far removed she had become from these small, human acts. The doors slid closed, and the train lurched again, carrying them deeper into the city. Marcus returned his gaze to the window, Lily leaning against him, unaware of the silent scrutiny she had invited. Victoria shifted slightly, feeling the unusual ache of humility, the strange, unfamiliar pull of admiration without ambition, without calculation. And in that fleeting intersection of 2 lives, the invisible and the powerful, a moment passed, small, ordinary, and quietly monumental. No words were spoken, but something unspoken had been exchanged, a recognition of integrity, a recognition of humanity, and the hint of a story yet to unfold. Marcus's gaze followed the train as it rattled deeper into the underground, but his mind was only half on the motion. Lily hummed softly beside him, her small fingers twisting in his, oblivious to the undercurrent of adult concerns around her. The city above teemed with lives he could barely reach, a million anonymous routines spinning out in parallel to his own quiet, tethered existence. He had long accepted that their lives were small, ordinary, and largely invisible. Survival, for him, had become a series of calculations: wake early, fix what was broken, feed what was hungry, teach what was necessary. But then the glance from the woman in gray, the one who had taken his seat, had unsettled something inside him. Victoria Ashford's reflection caught in the window opposite him. A stranger to this world, she seemed both out of place and terrifyingly precise, a queen in a foreign court disguised as a commuter. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the car again, not just observing, but weighing. Marcus noticed the way her lips tightened when a group of late arrivals pressed past them, the slight flinch at a jostling hand. It was a gesture he had seen 1,000 times in boardrooms and city streets, but he hadn't expected it here, among the smell of wet coats and the metallic tang of the train. She was watching, truly watching, as if she were seeking something unnameable, and he didn't know whether to be wary or intrigued. Marcus adjusted Lily's backpack, the little dinosaur charms bouncing as he did, and said something in a low, careful voice, words swallowed by the cacophony of the car. She was sitting just 3 feet away, yet the distance between them felt charged with an invisible tension. He sensed, without understanding why, that she carried a weight heavier than any adult he had encountered. In his world, weights were tangible: rent, bills, school supplies, broken pipes, but hers was abstract, threaded into the invisible fabric of a life millions envied. Marcus's gut told him that whatever power she wielded, it had never been tested by this kind of quiet vigilance, this kind of daily surrender to responsibility. Victoria's mind raced, a jigsaw of numbers, schedules, and imperatives trying to assert control over the simple human reality of the subway. She felt exposed, stripped of status, her usual armor of influence gone. And yet, she could not tear her eyes from him. Not the seat he had given, not the polite gesture, but the way he moved, small, precise, deliberate. The way he shielded Lily without announcing it, the way he gave something of himself without asking, without expectation. Every instinct she had spent decades honing screamed at her to step back, to remind herself of hierarchy, of power, of control, but something unnameable, something primitive and human, pulled her closer. She was aware of every detail: the rough edge of his hands, the faint stubble along his jaw, the tired set of his shoulders, the quiet ferocity in the way he protected his daughter. A sudden jolt threw Lily slightly forward, and Marcus caught her, murmuring reassurance. His patience was a shield, invisible but impenetrable, and Victoria found herself holding her breath, as if watching a delicate structure not meant to collapse. She realized, with an unsettling clarity, that she had underestimated the potency of small, ordinary acts. The seat she now occupied was more than a place to rest, it was the spark that might ignite something she could not yet name. She felt the weight of her wealth, the calculated authority, the endless empire, and suddenly understood that all of it paled beside the quiet, unshowy courage of this man who did not need recognition to be remarkable. Marcus straightened, brushing an invisible speck from Lily's jacket, and for a moment, their eyes met. The world narrowed. No announcements, no rolling eyes, no corporate power, only recognition. Victoria felt the hair at the back of her neck rise. Something was being tested, some invisible scale measuring value, kindness, dignity. And she realized, with a shiver she would not later describe, that her next move, her decision in the following minutes, could ripple far beyond this subway car. The train continued into the darkness, the tunnel walls flashing past like a metronome counting down to inevitability. Marcus, unaware of the storm of contemplation he had triggered, focused solely on Lily. Victoria, on the other hand, felt the pulse of suspense tighten around her chest, a quiet, electric awareness that the universe had just put her on a collision course with something she had long forgotten existed: genuine, uncalculated human integrity. And in that silence, thick and almost sacred, she understood that she might not walk away the same person she had been when she stepped onto the train. Victoria Ashford had not planned on feeling small today. She had prepared for crises, meetings, acquisitions, and shareholder scrutiny, yet here she was, seated on a subway bench, staring at the man who had given up his seat for her. She could feel every drop of sweat, every tiny heartbeat in the press of the crowd. The city's underground smelled of damp coats, metal, and the faint aroma of someone's hurried breakfast, and somehow, it was grounding, painfully, uncomfortably grounding. Her mind, usually a perfect lattice of strategy, deadlines, and projections, had stalled. Marcus Cole, the man who had risen quietly to an act of generosity she couldn't have calculated, had triggered something in her she hadn't felt in decades: uncertainty. She watched him now, adjusting Lily's jacket collar with a gentleness she had never seen in boardrooms, never read in spreadsheets, never experienced in the world of polished executives who measured their worth by titles, acquisitions, and the approval of men in suits. There was no performance in Marcus's actions. No calculation. No ambition. Just a simple, unwavering attention to his daughter. It was mesmerizing. She wanted to look away, wanted to remind herself that she was not supposed to be affected by random acts of kindness from strangers. But she couldn't. Every fiber of her body was alert, as if waiting for the world to tip, waiting for the revelation that this wasn't real, that someone like him didn't exist. The train lurched again, a violent twist that sent people swaying into each other. Marcus held Lily, shielding her from the bumping crowd, his body a buffer against chaos. And in that movement, Victoria saw something she had long forgotten existed outside the pages of board reports: quiet courage. Not the loud, attention-grabbing kind that headlines were made of. Not the ruthless ambition that had built her empire. But a courage that was invisible, uncelebrated, yet somehow infinitely stronger. He had survived tragedy, grief, and a world that rewarded presence and ambition while punishing sacrifice. And still, here he was, stepping aside, giving up what little comfort he had, for someone he would never see again if the train doors opened and the world carried him away. Her thoughts raced. Wealth, influence, power, they were supposed to buy her control, respect, and deference. Yet here she sat, exposed, vulnerable, without her usual armor. She had forgotten what it felt like to be human in the simplest sense, to be seen not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, not as an unstoppable force, but simply as a woman who was tired. Marcus didn't see her for the status she carried, he saw her as a person who needed a seat, a breath, a moment to rest. And she realized something frightening: she had spent her life moving through the world demanding recognition for power, while the small, quiet acts she had overlooked, the ones that truly mattered, had slipped through her fingers. The train slowed for the next station, metal screeching, doors rattling. Marcus shifted Lily to one arm, adjusting a strap on her backpack, speaking softly to her in words Victoria couldn't hear, yet somehow understood. She studied the way he moved, the calm deliberation in his posture, the subtle authority of someone who led not by command but by presence. A knot of suspense twisted in her stomach. She wanted to stand, to approach, to speak, but she didn't know what she could possibly say. This man didn't belong to her world, yet somehow, the collision of theirs felt inevitable, unavoidable. Her mind wandered to the empire she had built: skyscrapers, subsidiaries, quarterly reports, stock fluctuations. All of it, numbers, charts, profits, felt suddenly hollow in comparison to the richness of this simple, unobserved humanity. She thought of the countless people who had bowed to her authority, the people who had waited for her decisions like oracles awaiting omens, and she realized how little she had truly understood them. And then a more dangerous thought took hold, one she hadn't permitted herself in years. What if Marcus Cole, the single father with tired eyes and unpolished hands, held something she had spent decades chasing without ever finding? By the time her stop arrived, Victoria felt as if the subway had become a crucible, a place where the illusions of power and influence had been stripped away, leaving raw, unanswerable questions behind. She stepped off the train, but her eyes lingered on Marcus and Lily. They moved through the crowd as if guided by some invisible rhythm, ordinary and extraordinary at once. She didn't call out. She didn't follow. But she carried something with her, a silent recognition that the world she had built, for all its grandeur, had left her unprepared for this encounter. And somewhere deep inside, a seed was planted, a restless, urgent notion that perhaps the life she had orchestrated with precision needed to intersect with this man, not to save him, not to manipulate, but to witness and learn from what he had already survived. For the first time in 15 years, Victoria Ashford felt powerless in a way that thrilled and terrified her, a sensation that hummed beneath her ribs as she emerged from the station and into the city. And somewhere, miles away, Marcus Cole continued walking, unaware of the magnitude of the encounter, the way a single act, a single seat offered without expectation, had begun to tilt the axis of two lives forever. Victoria Ashford walked the streets above the subway, the gray morning light bouncing off wet pavement, reflecting a city she thought she knew but no longer recognized. Her tailored coat did little to shield her from the chill, and yet she hardly noticed the cold. Every step carried the weight of a new, unbidden preoccupation, Marcus Cole. The man had vanished into the city's arteries, leaving only the memory of his quiet strength and the faint, unsettling ache that her usual authority could not quell. In her world, problems were solved with a call, a signature, a meeting. But this one? It had no solution, no blueprint, and she hated it for that. Back in her corner office, the familiar skyline spread before her like a grid of opportunities, profits, and control. She should have been exhilarated, another acquisition, another market captured, but the triumph tasted hollow. Her mind replayed the subway scene endlessly, the small tilt of Marcus's shoulders, the unspoken devotion in his eyes, the way Lily trusted him completely, without hesitation, without calculation. Every detail gnawed at her, a reminder that her wealth and power were meaningless in the face of raw human integrity. She had encountered clever negotiators, shrewd operators, and ruthless titans, but never someone who existed purely outside the ledger of advantage, someone whose currency was courage and care. That evening, Victoria sat in her office alone, the city's hum faint beneath the glass. She opened her laptop, ostensibly to review spreadsheets, projections, and quarterly reports, but her fingers hovered uselessly above the keyboard. Numbers had lost their command over her attention. Instead, she found herself tracing patterns of the city, community centers, schools, libraries, playgrounds, trying to imagine Marcus's path, trying to guess his routines, his struggles, his quiet victories. She realized with a jolt that she wanted more than observation. She wanted connection. She wanted understanding. But the thought carried a pang of danger. She had influence, immense influence. Any attempt to intervene, however well-intentioned, risked violating his agency, his dignity, the very qualities that had captivated her. 2 days later, she found herself at a small coffee shop, staring out the window at a corner she vaguely remembered from her subway ride. She had come under the pretense of market research, a safe excuse she could offer her assistance. But in truth, she was hunting. Not for Marcus himself, she had no right, no claim, but for the small spaces where his life intersected with the city. And then she saw it, a flash of movement, a brown ponytail, a scuffed sneaker, the unmistakable energy of a child confident in her father's care. Marcus was behind her, holding a wrench in one hand, Lily skipping ahead, backpack bouncing. Ordinary, unspectacular. And yet the air between them, invisible to anyone else, hummed with significance. Victoria froze. Should she approach? Would he recognize her? More importantly, should she interfere at all? She had spent decades wielding power with precision, shaping lives she barely knew. This was different. This was raw. This was humanity unmediated by protocol, unbuffered by boardrooms. She could see the same quiet pride in him she had seen on the subway, the same patience, the same integrity. And she knew, with a certainty that startled her, that whatever she did next could either preserve that dignity or destroy it. She decided not to act immediately. Instead, she observed, noting how he navigated the neighborhood, how neighbors greeted him with warmth, how Lily's laughter punctuated the air like a bell no one else seemed to hear. Suspense coiled in her chest. This was a life she had never touched, a life both fragile and unyielding. She realized she was on the precipice of two choices, to step in as the billionaire savior, risking patronization and unintended harm, or to step back and risk losing an opportunity to witness something extraordinary. The line between action and inaction blurred. Victoria had spent 30 years mastering control, and now control itself mocked her. She understood, with a chill running down her spine, that Marcus Cole's life, and the lesson he carried silently for the world, was beyond her usual methods of influence. Every instinct screamed caution. Every heartbeat demanded engagement. She was trapped in a suspended space of suspense, the city moving around her, indifferent, unstoppable. And she realized, with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, that the next encounter would not be incidental. It would be deliberate. It would be a collision of worlds. And nothing about it would be predictable. For Marcus, life continued in its ordinary cadence, oblivious to the scrutiny of a woman whose decisions shaped entire industries. For Victoria, each step through the city's streets became a reconnaissance mission of the heart, a search for understanding without intrusion. And somewhere between intention and consequence, the stage was set for a confrontation that neither could fully anticipate, but both would feel in every trembling second of the encounter to come. Victoria Ashford stood outside the small community center on a quiet block in Chelsea, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. She had rehearsed a dozen reasons for being here: research, market observation, philanthropic initiative, but none of them were true. The real reason throbbed in her chest like a pulse she could no longer ignore. She was here for Marcus Cole, the man who had given up a seat without hesitation, whose ordinary courage had pried open something long locked in her heart. The city buzzed around her, indifferent, but she felt the tension of possibility in the still air. Something was about to happen, though she didn't know what. Inside, Marcus was teaching a group of children how to build simple wooden toys. Sawdust floated in beams of sunlight from the high windows, catching the faint smell of glue and varnish. Lily, now 10, leaned over to offer encouragement to a younger boy struggling to hammer a nail straight. Marcus moved from child to child with patient guidance, his voice calm but firm, modulating stories and instructions to keep the room in harmony. It was the same patience she had glimpsed on the subway, magnified tenfold, radiating quiet authority without force, without a hint of performance. Victoria paused at the door, watching him from a distance. She wanted to step in, to speak, to offer assistance in some controlled, precise way, but every fiber of her instinct warned her against it. Marcus's world wasn't something to be conquered, optimized, or managed. This wasn't a meeting, a presentation, or a negotiation. This was life, messy and unpredictable, and she was an outsider wielding enormous, disruptive power. She swallowed hard, her fingers clenching the folder she had brought, a set of proposals, budgets, and resources she could offer him. She realized, with an unsettling mix of desire and dread, that every ounce of influence she carried could either build or crush the fragile integrity of this ordinary life. Marcus looked up, and for a brief, electric moment, their eyes met. Recognition flashed across his features, not surprise, not delight, but assessment. He had already seen her, in a way, on the subway, and now he was seeing her again, fully, in a context where her wealth meant nothing. The tension between them was palpable, a tight wire strung between two worlds that had never been meant to intersect. He didn't smile, didn't acknowledge her presence with casual politeness. He simply observed, and that observation carried weight far heavier than any greeting could convey. Victoria took a cautious step forward, her voice low, almost tentative. "Marcus," she said. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of suspicion that she could not disguise. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, his body language saying without words that he would not be manipulated, that he would not be observed like a specimen. "Victoria," he replied evenly. The single word was a test, a shield, a challenge. I wanted to do something," she continued, words stumbling over themselves as her usual precision faltered. "I have resources. I can help. I can provide support." He shook his head slowly, cutting her off without anger but with firm finality. "No," he said, voice calm, voice measured, "that's not what we need. The room seemed to shrink, the children's laughter fading into a background hum as his presence anchored the space. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I don't need charity. I don't need intervention. Lily doesn't need a benefactor. We're doing fine. We've always been fine. Victoria felt the words hit her like a physical blow, their simplicity and clarity slicing through her carefully constructed assumptions. She had spent decades wielding her power to control outcomes, to mold reality, to solve problems, yet here was a man who rejected the very lifeline she had come to offer. She realized with a jolt that her wealth, her influence, her brilliance, all of it was meaningless if it could not respect the dignity of the person she was trying to reach. The room held its breath. Marcus's eyes met hers, unwavering, and for the first time in years, Victoria felt unarmed, exposed, vulnerable not from threat but from the revelation of truth. She wanted to argue, to justify, to maneuver her way into control, but the weight of his gaze forced stillness. And in that stillness, she understood, this was not about her power. It was about his life, his choices, his integrity. Any action she took had to honor that, or she would destroy everything she intended to help. The tension lingered, taut as a drawn bow. Victoria realized she was at a crossroads she had not anticipated. The decision she made in the next moments would define whether she remained a distant figure of influence, or whether she could truly engage, learn, and, perhaps, find a way to walk alongside Marcus without overstepping, without taking, without imposing. And somewhere deep inside, the first spark of humility and possibility flickered, fragile but undeniable, lighting a path neither of them could yet see. Victoria Ashford lingered outside the community center long after Marcus had left, the hum of the city vibrating beneath her feet like an unrelenting pulse. For days, she had wrestled with the decision of how, or if, she should approach him again. The power she wielded had always been absolute in her world. Meetings ended with signatures, challenges dissolved under her influence, and every problem had a solution mapped and measured. But Marcus Cole's life was not a spreadsheet. It was not a quarterly report. It was unpredictable, fragile, and lived in the spaces where influence could be destructive rather than helpful. And yet, she could not stop herself. Something about him, about the way he existed so fully, so unapologetically, pulled at a part of her she had buried long ago. She decided on a careful approach. Not charity. Not intervention. Not the quiet manipulation of resources to impose her vision. She would offer a proposition, a chance to collaborate on his terms, on the ground, in the real trenches of life. Her hands tightened around the folder she carried, proposals for community initiatives, budgets, volunteer networks, and strategic partnerships. Every document was crafted with precision, but every number and plan was meaningless if it didn't respect his autonomy. Marcus arrived, Lily skipping ahead, backpack bouncing against her shoulders. He paused when he saw Victoria standing near the doorway, an unguarded curiosity in his eyes. His stance was casual, yet there was the unmistakable tension of someone who had been assessed and measured, and did not appreciate being under scrutiny. Victoria, he said, the single word carrying both recognition and caution. Marcus, she began, voice steady but soft, I wanted to propose something. Not charity. Not a handout. Something you can actually shape, decide, run yourself. He folded his arms, skeptical, the faint crease between his brows betraying his wariness. Go on, he said, voice neutral but alert. Victoria laid the folder on the low table by the entrance, opening it carefully. I've been thinking about the centers you run, the work you do with families, with kids. I want to expand it. Not from above, not as a board decision, but from the ground up. I want you to lead it. Full autonomy. Budget, staff, strategy, you choose. I provide resources, connections, logistics. You build it the way you see fit. Marcus studied her, his tired eyes narrowing as he processed the weight of her words. You mean, you want me to run a multi-site program funded by your company? Yes, she said. And not just any program. A network of community centers across the city. Childcare, after-school programs, job training, counseling, the works. But you're in charge. You tell me what matters. I won't interfere. I won't dictate. The words hung between them, heavy and electric. Marcus's first reaction was disbelief, then skepticism, then a flicker of the cautious hope that he had long kept buried. "And you just trust me to do it?" he asked, incredulous. Victoria looked him squarely in the eyes. "I trust you because I've seen you. I've seen how you operate, how you treat people, how you solve problems that no spreadsheet or boardroom ever prepared you for. You don't need me to fix your life, Marcus. I just want to give you the tools to do what you already do best." He exhaled, a long, measured breath that seemed to carry the weight of years of struggle, grief, and quiet triumph. "And Lily? You understand that this will take me away sometimes." "She's in good hands," Victoria said gently. "But more than that, you'll be building something meaningful, something that leaves a mark beyond survival. I know how important family is to you, Marcus. And I'm not asking you to compromise that. I want to support it." The tension in the air was palpable, an invisible thread stretching tight between them. Marcus's pride warred with his recognition of the opportunity before him. Accepting could mean resources he had never imagined, refusing could preserve the autonomy he had fought for so fiercely. His gaze shifted briefly to Lily, who was stacking chairs in the corner, unaware of the pivotal moment unfolding. Finally, he leaned back, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to release decades of unacknowledged weight. "I'll consider it," he said, voice low but firm. "But on my terms. Absolute autonomy. No interference. You provide resources, I provide results. And you need to understand one thing, this isn't charity. It's partnership. And if you step over that line, you'll lose more than just credibility." Victoria nodded, the faintest smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Understood," she said. "I don't want to save you, Marcus. I want to stand beside you. If you let me." For a long moment, the city seemed to hold its breath, the ordinary bustle outside pausing as if it sensed the gravity of the choice. Marcus's eyes softened slightly, the first hint of cautious trust in decades of vigilance. He extended his hand, rough from work, strong from endurance. Victoria took it, not as a CEO reaching for control, but as a human recognizing another human. The collision of their worlds had begun, not with grandeur or ceremony, but with a handshake, an agreement, and a silent understanding, that real change required humility, patience, and the courage to surrender power in order to witness life in its rawest, most transformative form. And somewhere, beneath the fluorescent lights and the hum of the city, the first step of something monumental had been taken. The autumn air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and the distant hum of the city that never slept. Victoria Ashford stepped off the subway at 53rd Street, her usual confidence tempered by a rare vulnerability she hadn't felt in decades. She was not coming here to control, not coming to sign contracts or measure outcomes. She was coming to witness. To see the life Marcus Cole had built, not the life her money could craft, but the life he had painstakingly nurtured from sheer will, integrity, and love. Marcus was already there, setting up chairs in the main room of the Chelsea Community Center. Lily, taller now, moving with the easy grace of a child accustomed to responsibility and freedom alike, helped stack supplies. There was laughter, chatter, the small chaos that came with real, human engagement. And yet, in the midst of it all, Marcus stood apart, not detached, but present, steady, guiding without overpowering, teaching without preaching. Victoria paused at the doorway, her eyes scanning the room. Every child who laughed, every parent who looked relieved to have a safe space, every teacher who nodded at his calm authority, was a testament to the choices he had made, the dignity he had preserved, and the life he had refused to have dictated by charity, pity, or outside influence. Her heart clenched with the simultaneous ache of admiration and humility. She stepped forward cautiously, and Marcus noticed her. For the first time in months, he did not recoil, did not assume judgment. His eyes, tired but unbroken, met hers with the same recognition she had seen on the subway 3 years ago. A moment passed between them, unspoken, electric, heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired since that day. Then he returned to his work, not ignoring her, but demonstrating the quiet resilience that had captivated her from the very beginning. Weeks turned into months, and Victoria began to participate differently. She wasn't there to fundraise, to strategize, or to issue directives. She was there to see what Marcus already understood. She watched him navigate disputes between parents with patience, organize volunteers with humor, and guide teenagers with firm kindness that demanded respect without fear. She realized that this was leadership she had never encountered, unglamorous, unscripted, and profoundly human. One evening, as the center closed and the golden light of dusk filtered through tall windows, Marcus approached her. "You've been coming here a lot," he said quietly, the edge of an observation honed over years of careful assessment in his voice. "I'm learning," Victoria admitted. "Learning what it means to actually care. To witness, not just direct." He nodded slowly, as if considering whether she was truly being honest. "You've done a lot of good," he said. "But you can't fix people. You can't fix lives with money or influence. You can only offer tools. And even then, the work, it's theirs. Always theirs." Victoria felt a shiver of recognition. She had spent decades believing her wealth was a solution to problems, a way to shape outcomes, a method to control reality. And now she understood, Marcus had shown her that real change came not from the power she wielded, but from the choices people made with their own hands, guided by their own hearts. The moment of reckoning came one Tuesday morning. The city hummed beneath the subway, 1,000 lives intersecting in imperceptible ways. Marcus sat in his usual window seat, watching the lights flicker past. Lily was at school, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The car doors opened, and a young man with tired eyes and worn clothes stepped aboard. The train was crowded, and there was only one empty seat, next to Marcus. The young man hesitated, scanning for another option. Then he saw an older woman, heavy-set, struggling with a shopping bag. Without thinking, he stepped aside and gestured for her to sit. "Please," he said, "you look like you need it more than me." Marcus's heart lifted in quiet wonder. He watched the simple, ordinary act, the essence of humanity distilled into a moment that carried more weight than any boardroom or contract. And then he saw her, Victoria, standing near the far doors, watching without expectation, without interference. Their eyes met across the car, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no calculation, just recognition. She smiled faintly, a real, human smile. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. They simply acknowledged the truth they had both discovered, that life, at its best, moved in gestures like this. The train doors opened, Victoria stepped onto the platform, disappearing into the flow of commuters. Marcus stayed in his seat a moment longer, absorbing the ordinary miracle of the scene. Somewhere in the city, someone was standing up so someone else could sit down. And he realized, fully, that this was the continuum they had created, not wealth dictating outcome, not authority enforcing change, but choice, integrity, and the quiet, relentless courage to act with kindness. The lesson was clear, it was never about what you could give. It was about what you chose to give anyway. And in that endless current of small, ordinary acts, the world, fragile, chaotic, imperfect, shifted, just a little, one life at a time. Marcus rose, grabbed his bag, and walked into the crisp autumn air, ready to continue the work he had always done, building lives, one choice, one act, one moment at a time.